So Ved, I'm really excited to have you on the Leadermorphosis podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I thought we could start with the Yash Papers story because it's such a beautiful story, and particularly the event that happened more than 20 years ago now that really catalyzed a complete shift in how the company was organized. So tell us about how Yash began and how it's evolved.
So we started as a very small company, and it was just some way for my father and my mother to find something to do in life and to make sure they make their ends meet. So it was a really small company, and we kept growing the company. And it was structured in a traditional hierarchical system sort of way where there were line supervisors and managers and typical hierarchical sort of setup. And that's what my father knew. That's how companies were managed. However, we had this big incident which you mentioned in our township. There was a Hindu-Muslim clash which led to a mosque being demolished, which led to a complete curfew. The factory was about 12 kilometers away from town. All the so-called officers were based in town. It also meant that, and I'm talking about the times before mobile phones came about and there was no internet, and our phone lines actually typically didn't work, and they had also, I think, maybe brought down the phone systems. So there was no way to connect to the factory, and curfew was for a month. And the assumption was that, of course, they have to shut down the factory because you need raw material, you need sales, you need you need fuel to run the boilers. But since we couldn't do much about it, the idea was, okay, we're going to go back and do what we can to salvage. So when the team actually came back, they realized that we had a record production. So that was truly surprising because, the workers self-organized to get raw material on credit. And that made the team realize that, or mostly my father realized that, there was no reason to have this hierarchy. And that's where our experimentation with self-management began. And my father found a person who was talking about it around then. And he had read Maverick by Ricardo Semler. And so that happened around the same time. We're talking about 92 and 92, 93. And, so all these things came about to take us towards the direction of self-management.
And what's been your journey? Because you inherited the business from your father after he passed away, and I understand that you've been on a kind of journey of your own, finding like where is your place and is this the right place for you and what's the purpose of the business and how should it evolve? So can you tell us a bit about that?
So I joined because I just wanted to have my father do whatever he wanted to do, which was to ride a motorcycle all around the world. What I realized was that I really wanted my father to be able to become free. And I thought, okay, if I came back, and I was studying in England then, if I came back and, I took over or at least tried to manage the show, then he would be able to do whatever he wanted, and which is what more or less happened, except the business tested me in all sorts of ways. And I kept feeling that this wasn't my thing. So my wife asked me the question that, what would you do if you could do anything and there was nothing hampering you? And each time I would look within, I felt that it would be something to do with nature, to leave the earth better. And around the same time, I met one of my mentors who taught me a few things. And he said that there are no coincidences in life. Everything happens for a reason and everything is part of a journey. And he said, whatever you've gained till now, there is no way for you to wish it away. You have to be able to build on top of that, rather than trying to find the Shambhala and going off to the Himalayas and meditating for a couple of years. And then he said, you can try it, but it won't, according to his experience, it won't matter too much. So what I also realized was we were making a lot of packaging material, but we had no control over its usage. And typically it was used for things where we were making paper out of sugarcane waste. but it was being covered by plastic and made into soap wrappers or bag-in-box applications, different applications. So we decided to start working towards make packaging that is compostable. And that led to us focusing in two areas. One was finding replacements for flexible packaging, which is typically potato chip bags and multi-layer sort of plastic bags. And the other was styrofoam, both of which was non-recyclable, non-compostable, and fundamentally had carcinogens as well. So that was basically where the journey, that the company started focusing more towards meaning and purpose. And it's been an amazing journey to move out of typical pulp and paper. I also realized around the same time that I was handling the operations by default. It wasn't something that excited me, and that led to me taking the best decision of my life, which was to fire myself. And then that led to good things, and I can do things which I truly enjoy. And there are people who are better at operations, managing the operations, and they're driven by operations. So that happened over time, which has been a blessing as well.
I'm wondering if you could share with the listeners some of the things that make Yash unique in terms of how you organize, how decisions are made, because it's quite a unique company, particularly in India, I think, in terms of having these self-managing teams. So what are some of the things that are special about Yash?
So it's been an interesting journey because typically the background being that we come from an extremely hierarchical society. So everything in the society is, around caste, around status in the social order. We literally hear each other's surnames, and we can slot everybody by, what is their status in life. And the whole society is organized around this hierarchy, and it just goes on and on and on through school and of course school brings its own competitiveness, because it's such a huge population vying for a small number of seats for everything. So that brings in another angle of competitiveness, and again pushing the other person down. So within that, we've had to have our struggles. The idea of reducing fear within the system, and also reducing psychophancy, because fundamentally the way the system works is I kiss up, and the leader's role is to push down. So so that's to establish their own status is really important in society. And so that has been a very interesting journey, because each time we get somebody new, it starts again. So they've come from that system, and it's not just the leaders who are creating this. There is what also happens in the society is that people are not used to taking decisions. Typically, we come from a joint family background, where literally even at the age of 40, 45, 50, if you're not the head of the house, you're not even deciding where your child is going to go to school. You're not even deciding who you're going to marry. You're not deciding what you're going to work on. Even your job has to be consulted with your father, who would be considered. So that still continues. So it's not just the leaders, it's also the people who are working who don't want to take decisions. So typically their default is to look towards someone else. So we've tried to, over time, build on self-managing teams and try and at least push down is not the right word, push decisions onto a team and try and work from there. So I would say we've succeeded in past, but succeeded not in past, succeeded in part, but it still remains an uphill struggle every day. And especially since I take a backseat from the operations, it becomes a bigger struggle, because again, the leadership doesn't have the patience to sort of build on top of that. But that said, we truly believe if we are to become an innovative organization, and if we are to actually tap into the genius of each person, we need to find a way to not suppress the creativity amongst people. So we keep working at it, but it's always you're trying to hit out against all the possible social norms there are. So it becomes an interesting exercise.
Yeah, it sounds like it sounds like it takes a huge amount of willpower and patience and perseverance to keep holding the space for people to step into this decision-making authority and to give them the courage to go against the system that is so ingrained. And I'm wondering, where do you get that strength? Like, what's motivating you? What's driving you to keep you striving for that?
I don't think I know any other way to live. So it's sort of, I keep trying to not do this. So I keep trying hard, and I'm told by like my finance partner that that you have to step out. You have to be more of an investor. But it's really difficult for me to watch that happen. So just for an example, we were discussing an ESOP scheme yesterday. And, as soon as you're discussing a scheme like that, a hierarchy comes straight up. It's literally like, oh, workers should be given this much and the leaders should be given this much. They try and, because I'm there, they try and water down the tags that they put on people. But typically they would set up a 3 or 4 layer hierarchy. And I have to try and see, like how can we, because everything is an indicator. So every little step, has to be aligned. Otherwise, you can't have a hierarchy in one place and then say, no, our titles are not hierarchical, so it's fine. So every little thing is an indicator. And so we had a discussion yesterday, and I was just so uncomfortable. So this morning I sent a text to our CEO, and I said, okay, like this is like the two sort of layer hierarchy is the maximum we should go to. And of course he hasn't replied to that. So we will have to have a discussion. But to answer your question, it's just I just feel that it's not human to do it any other way. So we have to, and each time I look around me, I see so much light and so much genius in each person, and I see the possibilities that we are losing. So I just think that it's such a lost cause if you don't push and try and build towards that.
I had the pleasure of visiting you and meeting some of the people who work at Yash and the factory and everything in January. And I know that you've been working with my friend and colleague Susan Bast for a number of years. What has been the nature of that work? How did that come about? And what have you been learning from each other?
Oh, Susan is just such a gem. I think just being around her is enough reason. So of course, I read Frederick Laloux's book, Reinventing Organizations, and like it was just such a mesmerizing experience. It was literally like I vibrated through that book because I could feel the energy, and it was literally like every page was what we would have liked to be, and that's where the connection started. Of course, I mentioned that book to a few people, and it's been an uphill struggle again because they start putting logic into it. And as soon as you put logic, then things start faltering. But that there was an online forum, I think Reinventing Organizations had. So at that point, I just posted there. Would there be somebody in India? And lo and behold, Susan said, "I'm not in India, but I can come to India." And or I would be coming to India, one of these things. So it was just wonderful to get connected with her, and I just believe the universe brings people together, and I think it's just so special because she's such a learner. Just being around her is this spirit of somebody who's constantly trying to soak up, and that's beautiful, I think. And so she's been here a few times, and I think we've learned each time that she comes over. We've not, ideally, we hopefully would have had more of a structure to which we tried in the beginning. But then again, I do fight a lonely battle, so it becomes tougher to have that whole channelization till you don't have people who can integrate well. So, but that said, I think we're just blessed to have Susan visit us and you visit us because it's just beautiful to. And Susan connected us to other people. Lucia came and spent time with us, and sadly we couldn't get enough. That we should have been better at that than we were. But that said, just creates some vibration and it creates some connection. And every step adds value. And I hope that we can continue slowly acting out more in that direction.
What are some of the practices or some of the things that you've developed at Yash? So you've mentioned a little bit about self-managing teams and trying to push decision making down to kind of frontline team members. What are some of the things that you've put in place that are working really well and you're proud of?
So we start every day with an assembly where everybody comes in, and the speaker system is connected across the 80-acre campus. So those who are not there are also listening. And every bit of data is shared. So it's literally production data, downtime data, consumption data. So, so everybody knows what is happening. We even have boards there, which come from the ideas in a book called The Great Game of Business, which is again another wonderful read. And there are boards there which even state what was area-wise, what was the cost and the profit that we made yesterday. And it just brings people to forum where everybody stands as equals, and we try and and right after the assembly we break out into groups and discuss what is to happen that day, and that really brings people together. And of course we use it as a forum where if we are to rejoice about something, if we are concerned about something, so those are all the things that happen on that forum. The other one is creating, and again, I'll just reiterate that this is in context of the society we come from. So, so it makes it a little more, and these small indicators are really important. So we also created a dining room where everybody washes their own plates. Now, from a Western perspective, it may not be a big thing, but bringing everybody to a common keel makes it interesting. The third thing that comes to my mind is that we let go of all our typical designations, and everybody is a head in the company. So it's either a head or a trainee. There are only two designations, which means that, you may be a cleaning head or a business head or a paper machine head or something else, but that is your role. So we define by role rather than by hierarchy. So there is no movement upwards, so to say, or hierarchically up the designation ladder. So, of course, all the movement is more on the talent ladder rather than the designation ladder. So that's the next thing. The fourth would be that we meet on a daily basis in cross-functional teams, which are called daily management teams, and people decide what they're going to do on each of the areas. The fifth thing that comes to my mind is that, again, coming from the perspective of everybody understanding how they are contributing, the machines literally have an electronic board which gives them data on whether they are functioning at the targeted contribution level, higher or lower. So what happens there is that each person on the machine is knowledgeable about where they are producing and how they are functioning. So there are a multitude of ways, and of course the self-managing teams themselves, which meet on a regular basis, and they decide what needs to be done. So those are the multitude of ways that we have tried to build towards a more egalitarian culture. But that said, there's huge amount of challenges as well.
Yeah, what are some of the challenges? You've mentioned a few of them. Does anything else come to mind in terms of what's been really challenging in terms of creating this a different paradigm of working?
The main challenge is leadership styles, and actually enabling the leader to understand how they would be benefited if they were to encourage people to become more self-managed. And that's the greatest challenge, because everything moves from there onwards. So each time you hire, it cannot be policing. You cannot police people on how they are leading. So there has to be a more gradual hand-holding. And that's the greatest challenge, to not be able to do that. So, and if you have your HR and your company leadership both coming from a hierarchical mindset, that's their default. They very easily slip into that role, and the greatest challenge becomes to get away from blaming people and enable each person who wants to do great work to do great work. So yeah, those would be some of the challenges.
I hear from people often that self-managing organizations, that sounds great if you're in North America or Europe, but that wouldn't work here in India or here in Nigeria or here in Myanmar, insert country of choice. What do you think about that? As someone that you've mentioned some of the challenges of the culture where you are, for example, but do you think it's possible to have self-managing organizations in any cultural context?
It's definitely more challenging because I do travel and I see different cultures across. And of course, I do agree that in Europe or the US or a more Western culture where equality is more or less the norm, it would be easier. But that said, it's more needed here. So that's the difference. So it may be easier because, anyways, if I was to manage the way I manage here, I think that most of my people in the West would give their resignation in the first couple of months. So here I have to push down literally many times that this is to be done, and there is no room for negotiation. So and people like that. So but that would not work in a more thinking egalitarian society. Um, so that said, it's basically more needed in a place like India. I've never worked in Nigeria, but I presume it may be similar. But if I look at India, it's so needed because, again, the basics of humanity remain the same. I think we all look for meaning in our lives. We all look for purpose in our lives. We all look to be able to contribute at some level. And if the humankind, and that Lalu talks about it so well. And if humankind is based on these fundamental sense of being, then there is no reason why it shouldn't happen. I do think it'll be a much more of an uphill struggle, and you'll need a lot of aligned people in order to really understand and build. And whether we have that kind of energy to be able to do it is the bigger question. But I personally don't see any doubt that it can be done, and any doubt that it'll definitely change the way we function.
I think that's really beautiful what you say, and I love your phrase about everyone having genius and creating organizations where people can tap into their genius. I also had the pleasure of visiting the Jingle Bell School, which your mother set up. Um, so I feel like you're this remarkable person with it's so clear to me that you have this inner, very authentic drive as part of who you are, that you want to create a wonderful workplace for people. And I wonder how much of that comes from your parents, uh, and it's so inspiring to see this school as well, and to meet some of the students there and how engaged they are and how confident they are, and just a complete shift in mindset from the hierarchical kind of education system. And so there are sort of parallels I can see between Jingle Bell School, for example, and Yash and your philosophy. What are your thoughts about that?
Oh, absolutely. I think both my parents are aberrations to the society. They've been very different, and I think that has definitely been more or less part of our DNA. Because not only did both of them come from a very traditional home, my father more so, but they both broke the mold from there, and they both forged their own path. Not only in the work they did, but the way they lived, and their own relationship was extremely, which both coming from a traditional sort of joint family background, it was really surprising that they decided to build a nuclear family. And like for us, as growing up, there was absolute equality. There was no way my mother was being cowed down by anything. So of course we saw that at home, and of course there were people who were always journeying out, trying to learn. My mother was busy bungee jumping till age 50, and my father was traveling on his motorcycle till he passed. And of course, I think that further sort of built towards the work they did. I think my father, far more than my mother, came from the mold of, and I think the Jingle Bell school that you see is also part of that journey, where my father actually pushed my mother that he believed strongly that kids should learn through play, and it was something that was because of more his push. And of course, my mother also worked a lot on that idea. But my father truly believed that, this is the way we need to educate, this is the way we need to build our organizations. And I saw his own evolution. He came again from a very traditional management background, and he realized over time how he's missing out on genius. And he was great at building people and with people, and he didn't have the money or the resources to hire fancy, so it was always enabling, in finding ways uh, to find growth in people. And I think that also ran into my mother's organizations. And of course, it's totally amazing what she's done with the schools and the kind of impact you can have on society itself. Because from this little town, you have kids all over the world exploring their genius, and it's unbelievable the impact it has had. And of course, she's taking it more and more forward. We're starting to open schools in villages, and on the same pedagogical approach. And that's going to be an exciting change in the next few years.
What is your hope for the future in terms of Yash, and now you have this wonderful product Chuck as well, these compostable packaging, and sort of continuing to explore these different ways of working and empowering people and so on. Although I know Susan hates the word empowering. What is your vision or hope for things in the future?
I want to be in joyful places. So that's the selfish idea around it. That we want to be in places where my hope for the future is that everybody out there challenges me. So that's the basic hope, because we come from a society where I could say something and everybody would nod yes. So that should be the norm. So the more people challenge me, the more successful I think we are becoming. And we are getting more and more of that. And especially as millennials come in and we find that we give them an atmosphere, and I just love it. In fact, this morning we were in our innovation meeting, and our last head of innovations was this grumpy Russian guy, and we were discussing him. And I don't know, did you meet him when you were here?
No.
Okay, so he may have left by then. But he was amazing, because we were discussing what our innovation people should be like. So we felt that fundamentally they should be dissatisfied in life. So they should be grumpy because they have to be frustrated. And then they have to be able to exert that frustration and say that how everything is wrong and how everything needs to be corrected. So that's something that we would love. And I think it also comes from diversity. So we've tried to, when we started, like you mentioned, the compostable tableware unit, the brand Chuck. And when we started that operation, because it was going to be a new operation, we decided, and it wasn't even me, the person heading that operations who came from a local village, proposed that we hire 50% women. And that was drastic, because in this area, women don't go out of their houses. So, it's a very different place to actually challenge that equation. So I was so proud that we did that. And then, we continue to nurture that ambition of having more diversity. So like even in the last meeting when we were doing our hiring, I literally asked, how many heterosexuals did you hire? How many? So literally, are you hiring people who are different? Are you not? How many? How many people did you hire who didn't look like you? So so how do you challenge the norm? So how do you challenge? There's so much beauty that comes from just people who think differently, who challenge status quo. So so for me, it would be to find ways to provide people who are ready to challenge status quo a joyful place, and place that gives them meaning, a place that gives them joy, because there's so much time that we spend at work where they can align their purposes with that of the organization and then try and leave the planet better than we found it.
Yeah, that's a very noble and inspiring ambition, I think. For the people who are listening to this podcast, many of them are on journeys of their own to find new ways of working, to create more conscious, human, soulful organizations. What would your advice be to them, given all of your experience and what you've learned over the years?
Go for it. Please keep trying. The journey is going to be tough, but it's going to be so rewarding. It's just fun to see one person even come out and just let go of their fears. I think that one person is just rewarding. I keep giving this example of one of our electrical engineers who, in a full meeting, in a big sitting where everybody was there, and the our factory had gone down. And in an open meeting, I asked him, so what went wrong? So he stood up and he said, I messed up. It was simple as that. He said, I was experimenting and I didn't know what to do. And I decided to try something and it brought the whole plant down. And now this is a huge thing. And I was so proud. I said, this is it. Yes, we've done it. Where a person is ready to stand up and say that I messed up. So that one thing can keep us going. That one thing gives us hope. So I would say that, if we can create more and more of that, where people can lose their fear, bring out the genius, and stop putting things under the carpet and bring it out and try and work with it, I think we would have done our bit. So I hope that more and more people can join the bandwagon, see the beauty of this, let go of our own egos, let people find meaning, and create places where they truly enjoy doing what they're doing.
Yeah. Are there any other thoughts or stories that you would like to share with listeners?
I think you've covered a lot of ground. So I'm just thinking there's always more and more stories, and I think they've come about as your questions have come. Let me just think. So yeah, so I think it's just the one more thing that's coming to me right now is the whole idea of making mistakes. So I think in an organization, it's really important to provide a space where people actually are able to freely take risks and make mistakes. And the more we encourage that, so one of our foremen used to tell all the people who were on the fitters and mechanics that if you've not broken a bearing, you're never going to become a good fitter. So that's the kind of space that we want to be in. You don't have to repeatedly break bearings, but you have to be able to have the freedom to not have the fear to do it. So that's the one thing. And the second thing in our space, also because we judge people very subjectively, I think it's really important to build systems which enable people to become really transparent in their performance and have very standard systems, because that's the base. It's like if you are building a symphony and you want to innovate, you have to know the basics first. So I think the basics, in order to build a system which is more or less self-managed, you need to have very good standard operating procedures. You need to have very good training systems. You need to ensure that people know where the gaps are. It's not a subjective judgment on whether I like someone or I don't. So there have to be a lot of SOPs that need to be brought in, and there is a lot of training that need to be brought in, and people should lose their fear just like even deciding where they stand, because they can always improve. And I think building those systems is truly important. And without that, it becomes difficult to innovate on the symphony. The symphony is the base layer has to be really, really, really strong. The foundation has to be really strong. So I think we are still working on that. And I think it has to happen. But when that happens, it's like, places like, I find so much inspiration from places like Zappos or Apple even. I know that Apple is more hierarchical, but you go to an Apple store and there's a certain experience which you are guaranteed. So, or you talk to the person in Zappos and, there's a certain experience that's guaranteed. But it's also scripted really well and the people are trained really well. So I think that's the base layer. We need to think more like that and build that. And once we do that, then you've anyways created a lot of people who are able to innovate on top of that. So that's the only thing that comes to my mind.